Story 1. The morning after a lively gathering in our apartment, my roommate and I noticed some holes in the walls, so we headed to the large hardware store with the orange logo. My roommate went to find plaster, and I went to get some paint. When I reached the paint department, I started looking through the paint swatches to find a match for our walls. Keep in mind, I was still very hungover. I picked out a color that seemed closest, and if it wasn't, I figured I could mix my own paint, being an art minor. There was no employee at the paint mixing station, so I put the swatch in my hoodie and began sorting the paint swatches properly as my mild OCD kicked in. Then, suddenly, I heard a loud hum. "Karen, I need you to do your job and mix me some paint." I stared blankly at her, still too hungover to respond. "Karen, hello, I'm talking to you, mix my paint." Fortunately, my brain finally started working again. "I don't work her," I began, but Karen cut me off. "Don't lie to me. I saw you sorting the color wall poorly. Only a lazy employee would do that sort of nonsense." "Ma'am, I'm going to be honest, I'm really hungover, and your yelling is making me feel nauseous." As you might expect, that didn't go over well. "You're a terrible worker and a terrible person for saying that. I'm going to get your manager and have you fired," she stormed off. Once she left, I heard chuckling from down the aisle. My roommate had been listening to most of the exchange and was laughing quite hard. He asked if I got the paint, and I explained the first part of the confrontation. We decided to wait for the manager, thinking maybe he'd mix our paint before kicking us out. A few minutes later, George, an employee, walked up, unaware of what had just happened, and started mixing our paint. Enter Karen, now with a very annoyed manager in tow. "That's the one that called me a horrible witch, and he needs to be fired right now," she said, pointing at me. Jason, the annoyed manager, looked at George and said, "George? I'm frankly surprised you'd say such a nasty thing." George looked confused. "Ooh, what now?" "Karen. Not him. The scrawny one in a hoodie. He even told me he is drunk." Jason looked at me, still confused. "Ma'am, he doesn't work here, but I can ask him to leave for insulting you." "No, he definitely works here. I saw him working." "Okay then, I quit," I said, playing along. "You can't quit. I want you fired." By then, our paint was done mixing, so I asked George if he'd like to escort us to the front. I'd never seen a morning shift employee brighten up so fast. Karen continued to cause a scene, and the manager tried to calm her down with coupons. My roommate, George, and I quickly left the paint department, but we could still hear Karen's yelling from the cashier's stand. We paid for our items, and George walked us to the car. I explained what really happened, and he laughed, promising to tell Jason the full story. Initially, my roommate and I were going to go straight home, but we decided to wait and see how the situation played out. George agreed to come back out once Karen was gone. The police ended up being called to escort her out, though she wasn't arrested. Jason and George came out to the car afterward, and after George explained the situation, Jason profusely apologized. We laughed it off, and I commented that the incident was worth getting out of bed for, despite the hangover. Jason gave us some free membership perks, and the next time we visited the store, we were informed that Karen had returned later that day and vandalized some yard equipment on display. She was arrested for that. It served her right. Story 2. This happened about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years. As a bit of background, I'm from Spain, but I'm studying medicine in Bulgaria. I study in English, but my patients speak Bulgarian, so I'm quite proficient in it. However, I'm not fluent in casual conversation. I'm better at discussing someone's appendicitis than the latest TV show. This isn't very relevant, but it explains why I tend to speak in short sentences when using Bulgarian. I live near the university hospital, and there's a grocery store right by it. I usually go grocery shopping there after class, and most of the time, I'm in my scrubs. I've done this countless times, so I'm not new to the area. The store employees wear uniforms consisting of black jeans and red shirts with the store logo on the back. On this particular day, I remember being especially upset. It was a Friday, and we had class with a doctor who was extremely difficult to deal with. He was sexist, racist, anti-Semitic, and so into conspiracies that he might as well wear a tinfoil hat. He once told me I'd get cancer and die if I kept wearing lipstick. Needless to say, I was not in a good mood. So, I was doing some shopping, earbuds jammed into my ears, with metal music blasting in an attempt to cleanse myself of the past few hours. It wasn't working, when the following happened. Note: unless otherwise specified, the conversation took place in Bulgarian. A lady asked me something. I didn't hear her, so I took out my earphones and said, "Sorry, what? Where's the bleach?" I don't know." I showed her the milk I was buying. "You have to know." "What? Why?" "It's your job." I thought I misheard her, so I plastered on a smile and asked, "What?" "You work here." "No, I don't." "Then why are you dressed like this?" I was wearing baby blue scrubs. Now I was thinking she might have taken offense at my wearing them outside the hospital. "I just had a class at the hospital." "No, your clothes are confusing. If you don't work here, you shouldn't confuse people," she said, then launched into a tirade about my scrubs. In Spanish, I responded, "Oh, just leave me alone, lady, and let me live," and I walked away. I know this isn't the most exciting story, but between how upset I already was and how baffled she left me, it stuck in my memory. I swear, I would have been less confused if she'd asked me why a raven is like a writing desk. Story 3. I was once in a gas station trying to choose between Dr. Pepper and a Monster energy drink. I was in my work uniform, consisting of black slacks, a white button-down shirt, and a tie. I'd also like to mention that I'm a woman. So, there I was, weighing the benefits of my favorite soda versus a drink. I desperately needed to stay awake when I heard someone next to me say, "You're out of bread." In my head, I thought, the Dr. Pepper is delicious, but I really need the caffeine. The person repeated, "You're out of bread." Still focused on my decision, I thought, maybe I should just get both. Finally, the voice shouted, "Hello? You're out of bread." I finally looked up and saw a guy in a trucker hat standing next to me, glaring. I realized he'd been talking to me the whole time, and I had not only ignored him, but was so absorbed in my decision that I didn't notice we were the only two people in the aisle. So, I replied, "I'm not out of bread because I don't work here." He looked me up and down, clearly confused, before realizing that my name tag was for the store next door. Instead of apologizing, he just huffed and stormed away. In the end, I got both the Dr. Pepper and the Monster. Story 4. This story takes place 4 years ago, but I've recounted it time and again. Here's the backstory. About 4 years ago, I worked at a hardware store that boasts of having the greatest tools at the lowest prices. Next door was a discount store, where the uniform consisted of a black shirt, while mine was a navy blue shirt with the company name in large font on the back. My managers loved me because, despite being autistic, I kept my composure better than most people who aren't on the spectrum. The people involved in this story are myself, an elderly lady, Karen, my manager Bill, the discount store manager whom I'll call Travis, since his name was unusual, and finally Nikki, who actually worked at the discount store. When I worked at the hardware store, I was allowed 2 10-minute breaks a day, along with a lunch break. I used my 10-minute breaks to go over to the discount store and buy a $1 noodle bowl, pork-flavored. Occasionally, I'd also grab some items my family needed, which meant that, given I worked 4 days a week, I showed up at the discount store during my breaks and sometimes even after work. I became friends with many of the staff at the discount store. Sometimes, I'd forget to take off my name tag, considering that the two stores were right next to each other, and I'd only be at the discount store for 2 to 3 minutes on my breaks. Occasionally, if people asked for help and saw me coming from the front with my name tag and similarly colored shirt, I'd lend them a hand with locating items or grabbing things they couldn't reach. So, one day, I was grabbing my noodle bowl when I heard an "Excuse me, young man." I turned around to see an elderly woman in a wheelchair, accompanied by her husband, who was wearing a World War II veteran hat. The woman asked, "Can you help us grab some blankets?" I said, "Sure thing," because clearly, neither of them would have been able to reach the blankets. I walked over and grabbed the blankets from the top shelf. She thanked me and asked if they had a certain bed in the back. I then explained the usual. "I don't work here. I work next door. I just come over a lot. which I'd said countless times by that point. This is when Karen entered the scene. "Excuse me," she screeched from across the aisle. "Do you work here?" I checked my watch, seeing that I only had 2 minutes left on my break. "No, ma'am, I was just helping these." She interrupted. "Nonsense. You have a name tag. Only employees wear name tags. Let me hear it." Now, neither Travis nor my manager Bill had ever told me that wearing my name tag wasn't allowed when I went out for my 10-minute breaks. I explained, "I work next door. I was just grabbing my lunch." "Karen, I don't care if you're on your lunch break. If you work here, you do what the customer says. And who would help some elderly people if they didn't have to, especially if they're clearly not from here?" That set me off because, although I may be white, my stepfather is half Mexican. I was raised to respect my elders, especially since I helped care for dying family members in their 90s as a child when no other family would. The elderly woman started tearing up. "Remember what I said earlier about keeping my composure? Well, I lost it with this lady." I yelled, "You stuck-up entitled woman, I don't work here, and even if I did, what you just said is utterly disgusting." That man fought in World War II, and given his blank expression, I'm guessing he can't hear. But his wife wasn't expecting this nonsense while trying to do some shopping. "If I worked here, I wouldn't serve you and would escort you out of the building myself." At that point, I noticed my manager Bill was calling me over the radio, and Nikki, the discount store employee, was peeking around the corner. Karen looked at me and said, "I want to speak to your manager right now." I called for Bill, and with a grin, I gave Nikki a look. She'd known me for a year, so she knew what I was planning ahead of time. I picked up the radio and said, "Manager to aisle 10 of the discount store, please. I have a rather rowdy customer causing a scene." At this point, Nikki was watching the door for Bill to walk through before calling Travis. Bill arrived and asked, "What's going on here?" "Karen, your employee cursed me out. I want him fired." Bill looked at me. "Mason, what happened?" I explained. She came up to me after seeing me help this lovely elderly couple grab some blankets from the top shelf. I tried to explain that I didn't work here, but she insulted them for being both elderly and not from here, saying her needs were more important. I did lose my cool for a moment and raised my voice. Bill looked at Karen and said, "I don't care what my employees do when they're on break and not in the store they work at. However, I don't think I'll be letting you into our store anytime soon." "Karen, what are you saying?" "Bill, he doesn't work here." Travis then joined the scene. "Hey Mason, Nikki said a lady was harassing you." "Yep, that's her, right there." Meanwhile, Karen was baffled by what was going on. Travis asked, "What's going on?" I replied, "This lady insulted an elderly couple for being old and not from here, and I lost my cool." Nikki saw the whole thing. Karen turned to Travis and said, "Fire him, you're clearly the manager." He looked at the elderly couple, who were signing to each other, and asked, "Is what this young man said true?" The elderly woman responded, "That rude lady said we're not from here, and this young man put her in her place." To which Travis said, "Well, I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't allow someone who harasses our customers to shop here. I'm afraid you'll have to leave." Karen responded with a very inappropriate racial slur and said she didn't care if she was banned since she could just shop next door. Bill smiled and said, "Lady, I just banned you from shopping next door as well." Karen was shocked. "Only the manager can do that." Bill pointed to his name tag, which clearly identified him as the manager, and said, "Read the name tag." Karen stormed off, knocking over a sunglasses display on her way out. Bill told me, "You can clock back in, and I'll give you an extra 20 minutes of break today. It's a good thing that lady didn't know you don't clock out for breaks. Next time, give me a little more warning before confronting someone like her." At the end of the day, I got drinks with Travis, Bill, and Nikki, and we all laughed about how that lady managed to get herself banned from 2 stores in the span of 2 minutes.